Good afternoon, everyone. It's another end of a long day down here at the courthouse. We've got some pretty interesting information today that got brought out. One is Mary Ann Rugwell. Mary Ann Rugwell, she is the BLM state director over the BLM, and she was our first witness on the stand for the government. And we've got some interesting things to talk about with this. I've even got a document here from one of the attorneys I want to go over here before it's over with. But it was a good day, I think, with Ryan Bundy's opening statements, and then Ryan Norwood for Ryan Payne. We had a good day today. And this case has been falling apart from day one out here, and it's exciting to be here and be a part of it.
Yeah, it is. It was. I actually missed Ryan Bundy this morning, which was very unfortunate, but I've heard so much from him. I know exactly how credible he is and how well he did. I know on the stand this morning, and then in opening statements this morning, Ryan Norwood did awesome. There's a few points I wished he had hit on a little bit harder, but he really laid out a great picture discussing what these guys actually did, and he asked the jurors to make sure that just because they might disagree with the way somebody does something, that doesn't necessarily mean they're guilty of committing a crime, and he asked them to keep that take that into consideration when they're looking over the evidence, and he really did a great job.
Well, he brought out, and Ryan Bundy confirmed this just beforehand. Ryan Bundy said Ryan Payne is a hero. All these other guys are my heroes, he said, and I wanted to make sure everybody knew that. He named a couple of different names, and Ryan Payne is a defendant in this case right now. So that made a big statement to the jurors. He said Ryan Payne is my hero. And Ryan Norwood, his attorney, brought this up too. He said Ryan Payne, he might have sound provocateur in some of his speech, but it was just speech. He came there because he wanted to protect these Bundys. He wanted to protect everybody there from malicious acts of the federal government, how they were throwing down Margaret Bundy, how they were arresting Dave Bundy and tasing Ammon Bundy. That's the reason why Ryan Payne showed up, and Jason Woods, Micah McGuire, Joe O'Shaughnessy. We can go on, Pete Santilli. We can just go on and on with all these names. 19 defendants totally in this case, and what the government has portrayed up until now isn't the truth. We've been finding this out the last few days. Yeah,
it was really encouraging to see all of the evidence that is being allowed in these opening statements that has not been allowed in the last two trials. I would go as far as to say the two that were convicted, Todd Engel and Greg Burleson, they deserve an entirely new trial. They weren't allowed to provide the evidence in their case. In fact, in closing arguments, Todd Engel was objected to so many times he could barely get a sentence out. At one point, Todd Engel said in the first trial that it was never his intention to impede anybody on the road of getting across, and that was objected to. And they said that the evidence proves otherwise, that he did in fact block travel, so that he couldn't even say that in his closing statements or closing arguments. And if you've been in court, you know that opening statements and closing arguments are not based necessarily on fact or evidence. They are the person's state of mind and what they want to do to lay out the case or wrap it up, and they don't have to be proving what they're saying with evidence. And here Todd Engel could not get anything in, but yet today we see all the famous pictures we've all seen of the BLM hiding behind the trucks, pointing guns at all of the protesters. All of that is being shown today. The pictures of the two snipers on the hill that the BLM had, that they had set up 4 days before the protest even occurred. All that was provided today to the jury, and that has been really encouraging to see.
One thing is interesting, so far, I don't think the government has objected to one thing. There's nothing they have been able to object to. With the new evidence that has been provided to the defense team the last few days of all this, they have been actually shut up. They're not allowed, there's nothing they can object to. All this stuff is relevant now. They can bring it in, and we're seeing it all. This witness, Mary Ann Rudwell, she stated on the witness stand today under oath that their only goal was to impound the cows to either give them back to Cliven Bundy to let him put him on his 160-acre ranch, or sell them and give him the money. There's an extortion charge in this.
Right.
These guys are all being charged with extortion, and now we're finding out that extortion charge is absurd. This witness today, the government's own witness, has admitted that they didn't have an order to sell the cows to keep the money. And it was brought up. It says, who was paying for all the impoundment? She said the federal government was. Well, this is something that's very interesting. Clivens Bundy, in this court document right here that I have from one of the attorneys, and I know it's hard to see it, but it's the trespass fees that he owed was only $8,815, and that's for over 10 years. $8,815. Clivens tried to pay these fees to the Clark County, state of Nevada here. He was only arguing that he did not owe it to the BLM, but $8,000, and they have spent, I think it was, I'm trying to remember the exact numbers, but thousands and hundreds of thousands of dollars just on the cowboys alone.
Oh, right.
Just on those cowboys, these contract cowboys, they spent hundreds of thousands of dollars. Now we've spent over $100 million in this trial, just trying to bring a false narrative out all these years. And now here we are, and we're finding out the cows, they didn't even have a chance to sell it.
I did pick up on one thing she also said when they were asking about why did the cows need to be impounded. She went through a whole list of things that the environment is being negatively impacted by these cattle, and the soil is being trampled on, and the desert tortoise, they talked all about the tortoises. And then they asked her, I just almost lost my train of thought, but I'm sure it'll come back. She said, but besides all of that, the biggest deal is that he had his cows on the property without a permit.
Without a permit.
That was so great to hear. So this all comes down to a piece of paper. This isn't about the $4,000 or $8,000 they're saying is owed, that they then turned into $1 million somehow when it hit the media. This is that he was doing something without a permit, and he had not received permission from his master to have these cows grazing on the land that he in fact had the grazing rights to. That's
a big point there, because this permit would have made the soil okay. It would kept the turtles safe, the tourists safe.
She did say that had he gained the permit, they would have granted another 10 years of grazing on this land, and nothing would have happened. There would have been no impoundment, no roundup, no BLM with snipers pointed at women and children in the wash, had he just gotten the permit.
This reminds me of a guilty plea. If a guilty plea, and it makes you safe for the public, but you're presumed innocent, you're locked up for 2 years, that's exactly what this permit is about. It's just like Joe Robertson over there in Montana, locked up for digging a pond without a permit. The pond was nothing wrong with it, but the permit is what he failed to get from the federal government, not the state of Montana, but the federal government. So he got locked up for 18 months in federal prison because of a permit. That pond still is not polluting anywhere, but they told the jurors that it was polluting the waters of the United States. The same thing we're seeing here, that these cows were dangerous to the public because Mr. Bundy did not have a permit.
And because Joe didn't get the permit, he now is a felon. He's lost his right to own guns, his right to vote. He did fight for this country to ensure those rights would be secured. He fought on foreign soil, those rights, and then here on his own native soil, he had those rights taken away. He also can't own any filming equipment. I mean, you look at all of the things that get taken away when you don't get a permit, and you realize really quickly that this has nothing to do about land being damaged or water being damaged. This is purely about control of the American people, and that is it.
It definitely is. It's like free speech. They want to set up free speech areas, and you got to get a permit for it. Our rights are being trampled on horribly, and Ryan Bundy said it again today, that we're not losing our rights overseas. We're losing our rights right here in our own backyards because we're not paying attention, and we're giving these rights up, and we're buying them back as privileges. He said it's like renting a house. He said you have privileges for that house while you're renting it. He said, but if you own the house, you don't have to pay rent because you have rights to the house. This is what it is. We have rights to this country. We're not renting this country. Now we're having it taken away from us, this property, whatever it is, and they're taking it away and they're selling it back to us as privileges. So we become a renter of our own country.
I hope if there's nothing else people get out of this case, it's the difference between state and local control on things versus federal. These federal lands here that are run by the federal government, the state can do nothing without the federal government's permission. It is literally like having the King of England here in the United States, that the state of Nevada has to go to the federal government, to the BLM or the Forest Service, and be granted permission to do things on their own land, as though the state of Nevada is incompetent to decide how their lands need to be run. I don't care if the state of Nevada decides nobody can do anything on the land. If those elected officials that have been are elected by the people make that choice, fine. But to have a federal government, a bureaucracy coming in and telling the people who live in this sovereign state, who vote, who pay taxes, who pay bills, who own land, what they can and can't do on their own land is absolutely ridiculous. That we as a nation still sit here and say we are free and we can simply vote things into being. You can't vote anything with the federal government. Don't elect them. There's nothing.
Act of Congress.
It's an act of Congress. There's nothing we can do about federal judges that are tyrants. They're appointed for life, and that's what these Bundys are finding here in this court. Is that no matter what we continue going through with the court process, it comes down to the same thing. These people are not accountable to we the people.
Exactly. Well, tomorrow we have court again, but only for a partial day. It starts at 12:30 tomorrow, so we don't start down here at our normal 8:30 time. We will have people out here behind us setting up signs in a protest area there. Our First Amendment area will be setting up tomorrow at 9 o'clock, but court won't start until 12:30 tomorrow, and we'll finish up with this witness here, Mary Ann Rudwell. And hopefully tomorrow we'll get that done, and we won't have any court after that until coming up next Monday.
Yeah, and she is actually the one who made the call to move forward with the impoundment of the cattle, so it's been interesting to hear her side of the story, but it's kind of what we've all been seeing online. You know, all these notices from the court that Cliven needs to remove his cattle, and it, you know, there isn't really anything new that's coming out today other than that, you know, if he had pulled this permit, he would have been fine to continue grazing his cattle. And besides that, I'm not really sure we've learned anything super significant about her testimony and about the steps she took to try to have him removed. One thing actually I will point out is that she had mentioned that after the first time they tried to get him to remove his cattle, there was a huge lapse in time before anything was done. And I know that's something Roger Roots also touched on in his video that he did yesterday. Just there's this huge gap, and instead of you know, them having to go through the process again, they were able to basically just open it up and just keep on going, like they hadn't had this huge time lapse, almost like these defendants who were free for 2 years and were not a threat to society, and now they're all of a sudden a threat to society. The federal government fails to act, and nobody looks back and says, you know, well, why were his cattle allowed the last 10 years? Why are you doing this now? Why is it such a big deal now to get 100 head of cattle? People, put this in perspective here. Millions of dollars on this case, over 100 head of cattle, and at one point I want to say she reported there were 900 head of cattle and only 100 that came back as being branded to Cliven Bundy. So you have all these wild cattle that are also out grazing. Who pays their fees? Who gives the permit for them and gives them their permission to be out on the land? This is not about cattle. 100 head of cattle is not worth a multi-million-dollar pursuit, and men spending 2 years behind bars as though they're criminals with no record and no threat to the public. I hope you guys can grasp that this is not about cattle, that this is about land ownership, this is about the mineral rights that are out here, which she also stated how many, I think it was like 450 million acres is in her responsibility just for the mineral rights alone that she manages. This is much bigger than 100 head of cattle, and this is all being done on your tax dollars.
Definitely. Well, meet us back down here tomorrow. We'll be back in court at 12:30, so it could be a late live stream tomorrow. After we get done, it may be close to 5 o'clock. I'm saying again because we probably won't get a lunch update at all, because we won't be in court till 12:30.
Yep.
So we'll get you some updates tomorrow.
So I want to go talk about these that just went by. So that's all.
Thanks
we'll see you
a
guys
lot.
tomorrow. God
Have
bless.
a good day.
Oh, you wouldn't wave at me.